She didn't walk into that building looking for war, but war walked straight to her. There are women who fight back loudly, who shout, who cry, who crumble under the weight of betrayal in front of everyone watching. And then there is Claire Weston, a woman who had never once raised her voice in 11 years of building her empire and had never once needed to. But today, in the marble lobby of the most powerful acquisition company in the state, everything Claire had quietly built, and everything she had silently endured, was about to collide in one moment that nobody in that room would ever forget. Tyler Weston was the kind of man who kept 2 phones, arrived home late 4 nights a week, and called it dedication. He was charming in the precise way that dangerous men are charming, the kind of charm that asks for your trust before it has earned it, and spends that trust long before you realize it is gone. He had married Claire 7 years ago at a rooftop ceremony in late September, when she was still the woman he looked for in every crowded room. But somewhere between year 2 and year 3, Tyler had found Vivienne Cross, his rich, arrogant mistress, and quietly decided that the woman he married was simply the wrong frequency. Vivienne Cross wore her wealth like a warning. She was brilliant, the way sharp objects are brilliant, useful to those who knew how to hold her, and dangerous to everyone else. She had been in Tyler's life for 22 months, and she had spent every one of those months making sure Claire felt it. The restaurant receipts left in jacket pockets, the conference trips to cities Claire wasn't invited to. The particular way Vivienne looked at Tyler in public, slow, deliberate, and completely unafraid, the look of a woman who had already decided the wife was a problem she had already solved. But Vivienne Cross had miscounted her victories, and the one variable she had never calculated, the one detail she had never researched, never considered, never once imagined, was already standing in the lobby, waiting for her. 6 years before she ever said Tyler Weston's name, Claire had built the Callaway Weston Group from a $60,000 inheritance and a rented office with a cracked ceiling. She had grown it across 11 years, quietly, deliberately, without press releases or public celebrations, until it became the most powerful private acquisition firm on the Eastern Seaboard. She had restructured her ownership twice, sealed her name behind a holding company so clean and so invisible that even her own board rarely said it aloud in external meetings. A man who never asked about your past, Claire had learned, never feared your future. Tyler had never asked. And so for 8 months, he had leveraged every relationship he owned, called every contact he had ever accumulated, and stacked every card in his hand, all to engineer the single greatest opportunity of Vivienne's career, signing his mistress's $300 deal with the most powerful acquisition firm in the state. He had walked her through the preliminary stages himself, coached her legal team, celebrated every milestone with her in private. He had done everything, except ask the one question that would have stopped him cold. He had never once asked who owned the company on the other side of that contract. He had never thought to. Unaware she owned the company, Tyler Weston had spent 8 months engineering the moment his mistress would walk into his wife's boardroom and sign her name on his wife's deal. The morning of the signing arrived gray and bright at the same time, the kind of morning that feels like a held breath, like the air itself knows something the people in it don't. Claire was already inside when the elevator opened. She stood near the reception corridor, reviewing a final contract amendment with her counsel, dressed simply, unremarkable to everyone who didn't know what to look for. Tyler stepped out first. He looked up. He saw Claire. And for one fraction of a second, one fraction that Claire caught and catalogued and filed away without expression, his face went white. Then Vivienne Cross walked in. She moved through the lobby the way she moved through every room, legal team flanking her, chin at an angle that had already decided the outcome, confidence so complete it bordered on contempt. She didn't look at Claire. She looked through her, the way people look through furniture. Then came the moment that split everything into before and after. Vivienne's assistant came around the corner from the maintenance corridor, moving too fast, head down, a cleaning bucket overloaded and tilting with every step. The edge of the reception desk caught it at exactly the wrong angle, and what happened next was not a splash, not a drip. It was a full, cold, grey cascade, She poured dirty water on wife, across Claire's shoulder, her jacket, her hands, the folder she was holding right there, in the marble lobby of the company that bore her name, in front of Tyler, in front of Vivienne's entire legal team, in front of 30 witnesses who would never stop talking about what they saw next. The lobby stopped breathing. Vivienne Cross looked at the spreading grey water on the marble floor. She looked at Claire, soaked, still, completely unreadable. And what moved across Vivienne's face in that moment was not embarrassment, not horror, not the basic human instinct to apologize. It was something colder, something that revealed exactly who she was beneath all that polish and wealth. She looked Claire over once, slowly, deliberately, and with the lazy contempt of a woman who has never once stood in the wreckage of her own consequences, she said the words that would cost her everything. "Who do you think you are?" Tyler Weston said nothing. He looked at the floor. He had chosen, and his choice was visible to every person standing in that lobby. But Claire Weston did not cry. She did not shout. She did not reach for any of the weapons that the moment was handing her. She straightened, slowly, deliberately, stood up from the marble floor soaked and steady, and looked at Vivienne Cross with the particular clarity of a woman who has been waiting, with tremendous patience, for exactly this moment. And wife's bold reply, 4 words and 1 gesture, delivered without anger, without performance, without a single raised syllable, left her husband and his rich, arrogant mistress speechless. Completely, immediately, irreversibly. The silence in that lobby lasted 6 full seconds. But inside those 6 full seconds, an empire shifted. What she did next was unimaginable. And it was also, by every definition that matters, the only thing that was ever going to happen. But sit with these questions, because they are the questions this story was built to answer. How does a woman absorb that humiliation, cold, dirty water, her husband's silence, her enemy's contempt, standing in the lobby of her own company, and still emerge as the most powerful person in the building? What exactly were the 4 words and the gesture that broke both Tyler and Vivienne in the same breath? And what does it look like? What does it truly look like when a woman who has been invisible for years decides, finally, to be seen on her own terms, in her own company, at the precise moment her enemy believed she had already won? The story starts right now, and it will not let you go. Dear viewers, this story is for everyone who has ever been dismissed, humiliated, or replaced by someone who had no idea who you truly were. It will teach you that real power never announces itself, and that what your enemies don't know about you is your greatest weapon. You will see how dignity destroys arrogance, how silence is sometimes the boldest reply, and how betrayal always carries the seed of its own undoing. Watch every second, nothing is wasted. Then drop in the comments the lesson you took away, and tell us, what would you have done differently in Claire's shoes? Subscribe now. More powerful, life-changing stories are waiting for you. Claire Weston arrived at 7:43 a.m., 17 minutes before her counsel, 41 minutes before her legal team, and exactly 1 hour and 9 minutes before the woman who had been sleeping with her husband walked through the front door. She always arrived first. It was a discipline she had built long before she built the company, back in the years when she was the only employee, the only accountant, the only one who locked up at night and unlocked in the morning. The Callaway Weston Group had grown around her habits the way trees grow around stone, shaped by something immovable at its center, and that center was Claire. She stood near the east corridor of the lobby with a contract amendment in one hand and a coffee she hadn't touched in the other, speaking quietly with her chief counsel, Raymond Park, about a clause on page 47 that had been bothering her since Tuesday. Raymond was talking, but some quiet, well-trained part of Claire's attention was already watching the elevator. She had known about this morning for 3 weeks, not because Tyler had told her. Tyler hadn't told her anything real in 14 months, but because Claire Weston had not survived 11 years in acquisition by being the last person to understand what was happening around her. She had seen the preliminary documents cross her desk 6 weeks ago. She had recognized the company name. She had sat with that recognition for 2 full days before she made her decision. And her decision, measured, deliberate, and devastating in its patience, was to say nothing, to wait, to let Tyler walk Vivienne Cross through every door, up every corridor, all the way to the lobby of the company his wife owned, and see what happened when reality finally introduced itself. Raymond was still talking about page 47. Claire nodded. The elevator opened at 9:51 a.m. Tyler stepped out first. He was wearing the gray suit she had bought him for his 38th birthday. She recognized it before she recognized his face, which told her something she didn't want to know about the last year of her marriage. He moved into the lobby with the easy confidence of a man who believed he controlled the outcome of this morning. He looked up. He scanned the lobby the practiced way people do when they're looking for someone specific and hoping not to see someone else entirely. He saw Claire. One fraction of a second, that was all it took. His face didn't crumble, Tyler was too composed for that, but the blood left it, just briefly, just enough. Claire catalogued it without expression, the way she catalogued everything, quietly, completely, and without giving anything away. Then Vivienne Cross walked in. She entered the lobby the way she entered every room, as though the room had been waiting for her specifically and was grateful for her arrival. Her legal team flanked her in a practiced formation, 3 on each side, the kind of arrangement that announces power before a single word is spoken. She wore cream, sharp, expensive, deliberate, and moved across the marble floor with the particular confidence of a woman who had spent 22 months being told she was winning. She looked through Claire the way people look through furniture. Raymond was still talking. Claire had stopped hearing him entirely. What happened next took less than 4 seconds and changed everything. Vivienne's assistant came around the corner from the maintenance corridor, head down, moving too fast, a cleaning bucket in both hands, overloaded past any reasonable margin. The corner of the reception desk was exactly where it shouldn't have been. The assistant's left shoulder clipped it at full stride. The bucket swung forward with the kind of momentum that has no reversal point. And it happened. Not a splash, not a drip. A full, cold, grey cascade across Claire's right shoulder, down her jacket sleeve, across both hands, soaking the contract amendment she had been holding until the ink began to bleed across the page. Cold, dirty water, on the marble floor of her own company, in front of her husband and 30 witnesses and the woman her husband had chosen. The lobby went absolutely still. The assistant froze, Raymond froze, Tyler froze, and to his credit, something moved across his face in that moment that might have been shame, if shame hadn't arrived about 14 months too late to be useful. Vivienne Cross didn't freeze. She looked at the water spreading across the marble. She looked at Claire soaked, still perfectly unreadable, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not horror, not embarrassment, something colder. Something that Claire would remember for the rest of her life, not because it hurt her, but because it told her everything she had ever needed to know about who Vivienne Cross truly was beneath all that wealth and polish. Vivienne tilted her head. She looked Claire over once, slowly, top to bottom, the way you assess something you've already dismissed, and with the full, easy contempt of a woman who has never once stood in the wreckage of her own mistakes, she said it. "Who do you think you are?" The words landed in the silence like something dropped from a great height. Tyler Weston said absolutely nothing. He looked at the floor. And in that single defining moment of his silence, in that precise instant where a man could have stepped forward and chose instead to step back, Tyler Weston made his final choice. Not with words, not with action, with stillness. With the devastating, irreversible stillness of a man who had already decided which woman he was standing beside. Claire felt it. She had been feeling it for 14 months, but feeling it here, in this building, on this floor, in front of the contract she had built with her own hands, was different. This was the version of it that settled something, permanently. She set the soaked contract amendment down on the reception ledge beside her. Slowly, without drama, she straightened to her full height, and she looked at Vivienne Cross, not with anger, not with tears, not with any of the weapons the moment was trying to hand her, but with the particular, unshakable clarity of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment and knows, with absolute precision, what she is about to do with it. The lobby was still watching. Tyler was still looking at the floor. And Claire Weston opened her mouth. What came out of it, 4 words and 1 gesture, delivered in a voice so calm it was almost gentle, stopped the entire room. Vivienne's expression didn't change all at once. It changed in sequence, first the eyes, then the jaw, then the slow, terrible rearrangement of everything she thought she understood about this morning. Tyler looked up from the floor, and what moved across his face in that moment was not guilt, not shame, it was something far worse. It was the look of a man who has just realized, too late, exactly what he has done. The silence lasted 6 full seconds. But inside those 6 full seconds, before a single additional word was spoken, before Vivienne's legal team exchanged their first uncertain glance, before Raymond Park quietly closed his folder, before Tyler Weston fully processed what his wife had just said, the $300 M deal that he had spent 8 months engineering had already begun to collapse. And Claire hadn't even walked into the boardroom yet. What exactly did Claire say? What was the gesture that broke both of them in the same breath? And what does a man's face look like in the exact moment he realizes the company, his mistress, just came to sign a $300 deal with belongs entirely to his wife? 4 words, and a gesture so quiet it was almost kind. Claire looked at Vivienne Cross, soaked, steady, unhurried, and said, in a voice that carried to every corner of that silent lobby, "I own this building." Then she turned, not away from Vivienne, not away from Tyler. She turned toward the reception desk, toward the young woman seated behind it who had worked for the Callaway Western Group for 2 years and knew, without question, exactly who she was looking at, and she said simply, "Please let the boardroom know I'm on my way up." The receptionist, whose name was Dara, who had met Claire on her very first day and been told by her directly, "If anyone ever asks, you work for the building," picked up the phone without hesitation, without surprise, without a single glance at Tyler or Vivienne. Because Dara had been waiting for this morning the way you wait for whether you've seen building on the horizon for weeks. Vivienne's legal team moved first, not toward Claire, but toward each other, the kind of subtle, sideways repositioning that lawyers do when the ground beneath a deal begins to shift. 3 of them reached for phones simultaneously. One of them, the senior partner, a silver-haired man named Gideon, who had been in acquisition law for 26 years, went still in a way that suggested he had just done a very fast calculation and arrived at a very uncomfortable answer. Vivienne herself had not moved. She was still standing where she had been standing when she said the words that now hung in the lobby air like smoke, "Who do you think you are?" And the expression on her face was doing something complicated. The contempt was still there, but it was working against something new, something that looked, underneath all that polish and certainty, remarkably like the first cold touch of doubt. Tyler had not looked up from the floor. Claire walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. And in the 11 seconds it took for the elevator doors to open, she did not look back once, not at Tyler, not at Vivienne. Not at the spreading grey water still pooling at the base of the reception desk. She stepped inside. The doors closed. And then she was alone. She exhaled once, slow, controlled, the way she had learned to exhale in the years before she could afford to let anyone see her hands shake. She looked at her reflection in the elevator's polished doors. Her jacket was soaked through on the right side, her hair damp at the temple. She looked, objectively, like a woman who had just had dirty water poured on her. But her eyes were the eyes of someone who had been carrying the weight of a decision for 3 weeks and had finally, irrevocably, set it down. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. She had built this floor herself, not metaphorically, literally. In the 3rd year of the Callaway Western Group, when they finally moved out of the East Side office with the cracked ceiling, Claire had spent 3 weekends on this floor with a contractor and a vision board, and more certainty than her bank account had any right to support. She had chosen the conference table, 12 feet of solid oak, purchased from an estate sale in Connecticut. She had chosen the east-facing windows specifically because she wanted every person who sat in that room to negotiate with the morning light in their eyes, not her clients, the people across the table from her clients. She had thought about it that specifically, that far in advance, because Claire Weston had always understood that the room itself was a negotiation. She walked into the executive washroom adjacent to the boardroom, removed her soaked jacket, dried her hands and face with the precision of someone on a schedule, put on the spare blazer she kept in the cabinet behind the mirror, a habit from her earliest years when spilled coffee and broken heels were occupational certainties, and looked at herself once, steadily, the way you look at someone you need to trust completely. Then she walked into the boardroom and took her seat at the head of the table. Raymond Park was already seated to her left. He had come up the back stairwell because Raymond Park had worked for Claire for 7 years and understood, without being told, when a morning required the back stairwell. He placed a fresh copy of the contract amendment, printed from the copy she had emailed herself at 7:51 a.m., 17 minutes before anyone else arrived, because Claire Weston had not survived 11 years in acquisition by failing to anticipate in front of her chair. He said nothing. She nodded once. The boardroom door opened 4 minutes later. Vivienne's legal team entered first. Then Vivienne, still composed, still cream-suited, still carrying the surface confidence of a woman who had not yet fully processed what the lobby had just told her. She scanned the room the way people scan rooms when they're looking for a target to reassert themselves against. Her eyes found Claire at the head of the table. Something moved across Vivienne's face that she didn't manage to control quickly enough. Behind her, Tyler Weston stepped into the boardroom. He looked at Claire, at the spare blazer, the fresh documents, the absolute composure of a woman who had just been soaked in dirty water and had somehow, in the time it took the elevator to travel 13 floors, rearranged herself into this. And his expression did something she had not seen on Tyler's face in a very long time. It collapsed. Not dramatically, not loudly. The way things collapse when the structure holding them up is removed quietly at the foundation, a slow internal falling that shows itself only in the eyes and only to someone who knows exactly where to look. Claire knew exactly where to look. She let the silence hold for 5 full seconds. Then she opened the fresh copy of the amendment to page 47, the clause that had been bothering her since Tuesday, and looked across the table at Gideon, Vivienne's senior partner, who was the only person in the room whose expression suggested he fully understood what was happening. "Shall we begin?" she said. Gideon looked at his documents, then he looked at Vivienne, and what he did next, the quiet, almost imperceptible lowering of his pen to the table, told Vivienne Cross more clearly than any words could have that the deal she had believed was already signed, already sealed, already hers, was not, in fact, any of those things. Vivienne turned to Tyler. The look on her face was the look of a woman calling in a promise. But Tyler Weston was still looking at Claire, and the look on his face, the particular, devastated rearrangement of a man who has just understood the full architecture of what he has done, answered Vivienne's question before she could ask it. He had nothing left to offer, because everything in this room, the table, the windows, the documents, the chair at the head of it, belonged to the woman he had let stand in the lobby of her own company and said nothing. Claire turned to page 47. "There is a clause," she said calmly, "that we need to discuss before anything moves forward, and I think, once you hear it, everyone in this room will understand why." She looked up. "Take your time reading it," she said. "I have all morning." Vivienne's hand tightened on the edge of the table. But it was what Raymond Park quietly slid across the table toward Gideon. A second document, one that nobody in Vivienne's legal team had seen before today, that made the temperature in the room change entirely. Gideon read the first 3 lines, and the color left his face the same way it had left Tyler's in the lobby, fast and completely. What was in that document? What was the clause on page 47 that Claire had been watching since Tuesday? And why, when Vivienne Cross finally looked down and read what was in front of her, did she push back from the table and look at Tyler Weston as though he had personally, deliberately, walked her into a trap? Page 47 was 11 lines long. It had been drafted by Raymond Park 14 months ago, not because Claire had known, at that specific moment, that this specific morning would come, but because Claire Weston had spent 11 years in acquisition, learning that the most important legal protections are the ones you build before you need them, the way you waterproof a roof not during the storm, but in the long, quiet seasons before it arrives. The clause read, in the precise and unambiguous language that Raymond had spent 3 days perfecting, as follows. Any preliminary agreement entered into with the Callaway Weston Group is rendered immediately voidable at the discretion of the principal owner in the event that the brokering party holds an undisclosed conflict of interest in the transaction, including, but not limited to, any personal, financial, or relational connection to the acquiring party that was not declared in full at the commencement of negotiations. Gideon read it once, then he read it again, slower the second time, the way experienced lawyers read things they wish they could unread. His pen stayed on the table where he had placed it 4 minutes ago. He had not touched it since. Vivienne Cross read it standing up. She had risen from her seat without realizing it, the way people rise when the floor beneath them shifts, and the sequence of understanding moved across her face in the exact order Claire had anticipated. First confusion, then calculation, then the cold, flooding recognition of what the word brokering meant in the context of this clause, and who, specifically, had brokered this deal. She turned to Tyler, and the look on her face, the particular surgical fury of a woman who has just understood that the man she trusted with her greatest professional opportunity had, through his own blind arrogance, walked her directly into the legal mechanism his wife had been holding open for exactly this purpose, was a look that Tyler Weston would not forget for the rest of his life. You brokered this, Vivienne said, not loudly, quietly, which was worse. Tyler opened his mouth. Nothing came out. You brokered this deal, she said again, each word arriving separately, without telling me you were married to the owner. I didn't know, Tyler started. You didn't know, Vivienne repeated it back to him in a voice so flat it had no flaw. You spent 8 months engineering this transaction. You called every contact you have ever accumulated. You put my name, my company, my reputation at the center of a $300 million negotiation, and you didn't know who owned the firm on the other side of the contract. The boardroom was absolutely silent. Gideon cleared his throat. Ms. Cross, he said carefully, the clause is unambiguous. The preliminary agreements, all 4 of them, are voidable at Ms. Weston's sole discretion. That is not a negotiating position. That is the legal reality of where we are standing right now. Vivienne turned back to Claire. And Claire, who had not spoken since Take Your Time reading it, was watching Vivienne Cross with the same unhurried, unreadable composure she had maintained since the lobby. She had not leaned forward. She had not crossed her arms. She had not done anything that could be characterized by any person in that room as cruelty or triumph. She was simply present, completely, immovably present, in the way that people are present when they have nothing left to hide and nothing left to fear. She let the silence hold for 3 more seconds, then she spoke. I want to be clear, Claire said, about what this meeting is and what it is not. She looked at Gideon, then at the rest of Vivienne's legal team, then finally at Vivienne herself. This meeting is not a termination. I have not voided the preliminary agreements. The clause on page 47 gives me the right to void them, but the decision to exercise that right or not to exercise it belongs entirely to me. Another silence, longer this time. Vivienne's expression shifted, fractionally, carefully, toward something that might, in different circumstances, have been relief. But Claire was not finished. However, she said, and the word landed in the room like a key turning in a lock, there are conditions. She nodded to Raymond, who reached into the folder beside him and produced 3 additional documents, bound, tabbed, and already formatted for signature, which he placed in the center of the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had prepared them well in advance of this morning. Vivienne looked at the documents, then she looked at Claire. What are those? She asked. Those, Claire said, are the terms under which the Callaway Weston Group will honor the $300 million agreement in full on the original timeline, with every preliminary commitment intact. Gideon reached for the top copy before Vivienne could speak. He turned to the first tabbed page. He read it. And what happened to his expression when he finished reading was something that Raymond Park, who had watched a great many lawyers, read a great many documents across a great many tables, would later describe as the closest thing to genuine or he had ever seen on a senior partner's face. Because the conditions were not punitive, they were not designed to humiliate Vivienne or collapse her company or extract revenge in the language of commerce. They were something far more sophisticated than revenge. They were structured, carefully, intelligently, with the particular precision of a woman who understood that the most powerful thing you can do to someone who underestimated you is not to destroy them, but to make them entirely dependent on the goodwill of the person they dismissed. Every condition in those 3 documents pointed to the same conclusion. The $300 million deal would proceed. Vivienne Cross's company would receive every dollar, every resource, every market access the agreement had promised. But the controlling seat on the Joint Oversight Board, the position that carried final approval authority over every major decision in the resulting partnership, would belong permanently and irrevocably to Claire Weston. Not to Tyler, not to a neutral third party, not to a committee. To the woman who had been soaked in dirty water in the lobby of her own company 3 hours ago and had walked upstairs, changed her jacket, and turned the worst morning of her personal life into the most strategically decisive morning of her professional one. Gideon set the document down. He looked at Vivienne. These terms are, he paused, choosing carefully, extraordinarily fair. I know, Claire said simply. Vivienne looked at the documents. She looked at the clause on page 47. She looked at Tyler Weston, who was seated at the far end of the table in the particular stillness of a man who has run out of moves, and something in her face made a decision that her mouth hadn't yet caught up with. She looked back at Claire. Why? Vivienne asked, and for the first time since she had walked through the lobby doors that morning, the arrogance was entirely gone from her voice. What was underneath it was rawer and younger and considerably more honest. After everything, the lobby, what I said, why are you still offering me the deal? The boardroom waited. Claire looked at Vivienne Cross for a long, still moment, and what she said next was not what anyone in that room expected her to say. It was not legal language. It was not strategy. It was 11 words, quiet, direct, and more devastating than any clause on any page, that made Tyler Weston close his eyes, and made Gideon look down at his hands, and made one of the junior associates at the far end of the table reach very quietly for the glass of water in front of her. Because I built this company to be better than what was done to me. Nobody spoke. Outside the east-facing windows, the morning light was doing exactly what Claire had designed it to do, falling across the table, across the documents, across every face in the room, bright and unsparing, and completely without mercy. Vivienne Cross looked down at the 3 bound documents in front of her. Her hand moved toward the top copy, and then she stopped because something else had just occurred to her, something that the clause and the conditions and the quiet 11 words had not yet answered. She looked up. Where is he in these documents? She asked. Tyler, where does he appear in any of this? Claire held her gaze. He doesn't, she said. And that single, clean 2-word answer was the moment Tyler Weston understood, completely and finally, exactly what his wife had built. Not just the company, not just the clause, not just the conditions or the oversight board or the $300 million agreement that was still, improbably, intact. What she had built, across 11 years, in silence, without announcement, was a life that did not require him, had never required him, had been complete and powerful and entirely self-sustaining long before he arrived, and would remain so long after he was gone. He had never asked about her past. He had never imagined her future. And now he was sitting in the boardroom of the company his oversight had never touched, watching the consequences of his own blindness assemble themselves into something he had no language for. Vivienne's hand moved again toward the documents. But what happened before she could reach them, what walked through the boardroom door in the next 60 seconds, was the part of this morning that nobody, not even Raymond Park, had seen coming. And it was unimaginable. What walked through that door? Who else knew about this morning And what did their arrival mean for Tyler, for Vivienne, and for everything Claire had built in silence? Scene 4 delivers the ending nobody saw coming, and the lesson it carries will stay with you long after the story is finished. The boardroom door opened without a knock. That was the first thing everyone noticed, not who came through it, but the absence of the knock. Because in the Callaway Western Group, on the 14th floor, in the boardroom with the 12-foot oak table and the east-facing windows, nobody entered without knocking. It was not a written rule. It was the kind of unwritten rule that forms around a person, around the particular, unmistakable gravity of someone who has built something real, and holds without enforcement, because the people around that person understand, instinctively, that some spaces deserve to be entered with intention. The absence of the knock meant that whoever was coming through that door had been told they could. She was a woman in her early 50s, composed, silver-suited, carrying a slim leather portfolio with the unhurried confidence of someone who has spent decades in rooms exactly like this one and has never once been the least powerful person in any of them. Her name was Judith Crane. She was the most respected family law and corporate attorney in the state, and she had been Claire Weston's personal attorney for 9 years, 3 years before Tyler had ever suggested Claire slow down professionally. She nodded once to Raymond Park. She set the portfolio on the table beside Claire without opening it, and then she stood still, quiet, present, in the particular way that attorneys stand when documents have already been filed, and the only remaining question is whether the other party has yet understood what that means. Tyler looked at Judith Crane, then at the portfolio, then at Claire. Claire did not look at Tyler. She was looking at Vivienne Cross, who had not yet signed the 3 bound documents in front of her, and who was now looking at Judith Crane with an expression that had moved, in the last 90 seconds, from confusion to calculation to something that was almost not quite, but almost respect. "Ms. Cross," Claire said, "I want to give you a moment to review the final condition. Page 9 of the 3rd document, bottom paragraph." Gideon was already there. He found the paragraph. He read it. And what it said, what Raymond Park had drafted with the same quiet, 3-day precision he had brought to page 47, was this: the controlling seat on the Joint Oversight Board would transfer in full to Vivienne Cross's sole ownership upon the conclusion of Tyler Weston's formal removal from any and all brokering capacity associated with this transaction, as confirmed by independent legal declaration. In plain language, the seat was Vivienne, alone, not shared, not conditional on Claire's continued goodwill, hers, permanently. The moment Tyler was formally removed from the transaction he had built for her, the deal became better than the one she had originally come to sign. Gideon looked up from the document. For the second time that morning, his expression crossed into something that looked genuinely like awe. "This is," he said carefully, "extraordinarily generous." "I know," Claire said again, and she meant it the same way she had meant it the first time, not as arrogance, but as the simple, accurate assessment of a woman who understood precisely what she was offering and precisely why. Vivienne Cross picked up her pen. She held it for a moment, just a moment, and looked across the table at Claire Weston. And in that look, in the complicated, layered, fully human thing that moved across Vivienne's face in those 3 seconds, was something that neither of them would ever discuss again, but that both of them would remember: the specific, private acknowledgement that passes between 2 women when one of them recognizes, too late, that she fundamentally misread the other. "For what it's worth," Vivienne said quietly, "what I said in the lobby." "Sign the documents, Ms. Cross," Claire said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a woman who has already decided which parts of this morning she is carrying forward, and which she is leaving on the marble floor of the lobby where they belong. Vivienne signed. All 3 documents, every tabbed page, every line that Gideon indicated. She signed with the focused, deliberate strokes of a woman who has recalculated and committed to the new arithmetic. Her legal team countersigned in sequence. Raymond collected each page with both hands as it was completed. When the last signature was finished, the boardroom was quiet in the particular way that rooms are quiet after something final has occurred, not empty, but settled. The way the air settles after a storm has passed and the damage is visible and the rebuilding has not yet begun, but is already, inevitably, underway. Judith Crane opened the leather portfolio. She removed a single document, clean, white, already formally filed with the state court at 7:58 a.m., 11 minutes after Claire had arrived at the building that morning, 40 minutes before Tyler had stepped out of the elevator, and placed it in the center of the table. It was a petition for divorce. Tyler Weston looked at it for a long time. He read his name at the top. He read the filing timestamp. He read the date, today's date, this morning's date, filed before the lobby, before the dirty water, before Vivienne's legal team had even parked their cars, and the understanding of what that timestamp meant arrived in his face, the way all the most devastating truths arrive, not suddenly, but completely. She had known for 3 weeks, and she had come to this building this morning not as a betrayed wife walking into an ambush, but as the owner of a company, filing her paperwork, conducting her business, and allowing the consequences of Tyler's choices to arrange themselves around her with the natural, unhurried logic of things that were always going to happen. She had not planned the dirty water. She had not planned Vivienne's words in the lobby, but she had planned everything else with the same discipline, the same precision, the same long-horizon thinking that had built every floor of this building. And when the lobby had given her its unexpected gifts, she had simply received them and continued. Tyler reached out and touched the edge of the divorce petition. He didn't pick it up. He just touched it. And the gesture was so small and so utterly without any of the confidence that had defined him for the 7 years Claire had known him, that it was the saddest thing anyone in the room had witnessed all morning. Claire, he said, just her name, nothing attached to it, no argument, no defense, no explanation that could have covered the distance between who he had been in the lobby and who she had always been in this room. Claire stood. She buttoned her spare blazer. She collected the signed documents that Raymond had stacked neatly before her and placed them into the leather folder he held open. She looked at Judith, who nodded once. She looked at Raymond, who closed his folder with the quiet efficiency of a man who has completed exactly the task he came to complete. Then she looked at Tyler Weston, one last time. In the morning light of the east-facing windows she had chosen specifically for this room, 22 years before she had ever said his name. And what she gave him in that look was not anger, not triumph, not the cold satisfaction of a woman who has won. It was something that cost her more than any of the rest of it, and something she gave him anyway because it was true, and she had always valued truth above every other instrument in her arsenal. It was grief, clean, honest, and already moving toward its own resolution. "I hope," she said quietly, "that you eventually understand what you had." She walked to the door, she opened it, she stepped through. And in the corridor of the 14th floor, in the building she had waterproofed before the storm, in the company she had built from a $60,000 inheritance and a cracked ceiling and 11 years of mornings that started at 7:43 and never once asked to be noticed, Claire Weston walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The doors opened. She stepped inside. She did not look back. And that singular, unimaginable act of walking away from everything she had every right to destroy, and choosing instead to build something better out of it, was the most powerful thing anyone in that building would witness in their entire careers. Not the clause, not the conditions, not the divorce filing. The walk. Because the women who change the room are never the ones who burn it down. They are the ones who own it, quietly, completely, and without permission, and choose, in the end, to leave it better than they found it. The moral of the story. Real power does not announce itself. It builds in silence with discipline across years, and when the moment finally arrives, it does not need to shout. The most dangerous version of yourself is not the one who reacts to what others do to you. It is the one who has already prepared for it. Claire was not powerful because she won the boardroom. She was powerful because she never needed the boardroom to tell her who she was. She already knew. She had known for 11 years. And no amount of dirty water, no arrogant question, no husband's silence could wash that away, because it had been built too deep, too deliberately, and too well to be reached by any of it. What people don't know about you is not your weakness. It is your greatest asset. Protect it, build it, and when the moment comes, and it always comes, let it speak for itself. Dear viewers, if this story moved you, if Claire's quiet strength, her patience, her discipline, and her unimaginable final act spoke to something in you, then you already understand the lesson it carries. Real power is not loud, dignity is not weakness, and the most devastating response to someone who underestimates you is not anger, it is excellence, built in silence and revealed at exactly the right moment. Drop in the comments the lesson you took away from Claire's story. Tell us, what would you have done differently in her shoes? Would you have avoided the deal? Would you have confronted Tyler in the lobby? Would you have walked away? There are no wrong answers, only honest ones. And honest stories are what we are here to tell. Subscribe now, because more powerful, life-changing, deeply human stories are coming. And every single one of them was built for you.